Thanks, Ingrid, and thanks, Joe, for inviting me. So, we've been asked to address the question, Ireland's energy crisis, what's to be done? And as you probably know, the Chinese word for crisis comprises two characters, one for danger and one for opportunity. And the good news is I think there's a huge opportunity for Ireland in the transition that we're going to see in the global energy system over the next 20 to 30 years if we move fast enough to grasp it. But first, a word on the danger. We know with 95% certainty now that burning fossil fuels causes global warming. It's the same level of certainty that we know that smoking causes cancer. And we've already had 1 degree of global warming. It's having impacts now. Our political leaders from around the world say 2 degrees is their target, to keep it under that. We're on track for 4 degrees on current levels of emissions. And that would have a devastating impact on human life on Earth as we know it. The World Bank describes it as being incompatible with a global organised community. And one of the leading climate scientists in the world says the difference between 2 degrees, that's the target, and 4 degrees, that's the trajectory, is human civilization. So what does staying under 2 degrees mean for our energy system? Well, a bunch of hedge fund managers, or ex-hedge fund managers, who are worried about their fossil fuel investments based in London, ran the numbers over the last few years, and they came up with the answer for us. It means leaving at least 2/3 of the proven resources of fossil fuels that are on the books of fossil fuel companies in the ground unburned. And that analysis has now been endorsed by the likes of the Governor of the Bank of England, the incoming Chief Executive of the International Energy Agency, from them all the way across to Mary Robinson and most recently the Pope. So the fossil fuel age is over, or else we risk human civilization being over. When John F. Kennedy said, we're going to go to the moon this decade, not because it's easy, but because it's hard, the scientists said, Jane, they haven't got the technology to do it. But setting that target drove progress, and 8 years later, the US succeeded with their moonshot, and Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. Yesterday, NASA released its first full picture of the Earth from space since 1972, the year that Apollo 17 delivered the last man to walk on the moon. And it looks as magnificent and as fragile as ever when you see that photograph. What we need now is an Apollo program to get us off fossil fuels. An Earth shot, if you will. Thankfully, much of the technology we need for that has already been invented by scientists and engineers. What's been lacking is the political will to do it, to drive it forward. And happily, as Al Gore put it in his movie, political will is a renewable resource. Our government has already agreed and adopted a policy objective of an 80% reduction across energy, electricity, buildings and transport by 2050. And when they finally pass the climate bill in the autumn, they'll give that political objective, a policy objective, an underlying legal underpinning. So the Energy White Paper that's also due in the autumn is a real opportunity for us to put, as a government and as a country, plans in place to actually become a fossil fuel-free country within a generation. So I want to talk in my time briefly about 5 things that I want to see in that white paper, 5 things that would actually begin to make that start to happen. The first is to put energy efficiency first. The second is to start the phase out of fossil fuels now. The third is to unleash a solar revolution as part of ramping up renewables more generally. Fourthly, to enable us all to become energy citizens, not just consumers or customers. And finally, to promote household and community ownership of renewable energy so that we all partake in it. Making energy efficiency first happen, I think, will involve something like an SSIA scheme for retrofitting. So we've welcomed as Friends of the Earth the EU Energy Union's energy union strategy focus on putting energy efficiency first. It's a really good move that they've said this, if they haven't said it in the past. Because as EU Climate Action Commissioner Miguel Arias Cañete said, energy we do not use is the cheapest, most sustainable and most secure energy we have. The Economist calls energy efficiency the invisible fuel. The White Paper is a golden opportunity to indicate a new level of commitment in investing in actually making that happen in Ireland. We haven't done it in practice here yet. This will no doubt involve a number of initiatives over a number of years, but we would argue it needs something of the scale and attractiveness of the SSIA scheme of the early noughties to achieve large-scale buy-in from households. If you remember, and I guess most of you will, the SSIA scheme gave 1.2 million account holders, so like about a third of the adult population or more bought into it, €1 for every €4 they invested, up to a maximum of €15,000. And the cost to the Exchequer was €2.5 billion over the 5 years of the scheme. Around the same time, actually, as that, we built 1/3 of our total housing stock during the 10 years of the boom and the bubble before the bust, much of it to poor energy standards. As it happens, it's estimated that 1.2 million homes need to be upgraded as part of a deep retrofit to start bringing down our energy use. And they could benefit from that retrofit at a cost of about 14 billion in total, so between 10,000 and 15,000 euro per house. So about the same investment that many people put into their SSIA. So a state incentive of €1 for us, for every €4 we put into retrofitting, would total more than 2.5 billion, maybe up to 3 billion, in exchequer investment. But it could be spread over 15 years, and it would essentially amount to foregoing the VAT, the VAT, on private investment in retrofitting for the state to forego the VAT. Indeed, of course, it would save the exchequer money in the long term, because otherwise we face massive fines by the end of 2030 for missing our EU climate targets. And we could also, of course, bring very clear benefits in terms of warmer homes, lower fuel bills, jobs in the construction industry. They should, of course, have done this during the bust if they could as a stimulus package to employ unemployed and construction workers. To be as appealing as possible, the reason I use the SSIA scheme is because people understood the incentive compared to PRSAs or other more complicated incentive schemes with tax relief. You give €4, they give €1. We think a cashback scheme rather than a tax exemption is the way to do it. And it could be funded from the carbon tax revenue. The carbon tax brings in about €400 million a year, so it could comfortably fund the level of investment we need over 10 years for retrofitting. Now, this would not solve the whole of the financing challenge. We still need some sort of pay-as-you-save or other sort of household credit scheme so that households could finance their share of the investment. And moreover, we need increased investment of carbon tax revenue in retrofitting households and homes that are at risk of fuel poverty, because they won't be able to invest it themselves. But again, that short-term investment would pay off pretty quickly in terms of lower cost to the exchequer on the €500 million bill they currently have for the annual fuel allowance that we give to lower-income households. So secondly, we need to start the phase out of fossil fuels. That means end the burning of peat for electricity by 2020, prepare for Moneypoint to stop burning coal before 2025, and ban fracking. So if at least 2/3 of all existing fossil fuel reserves have to stay in the ground unburned, now is not the time for Ireland to start prospecting and drilling up and down the country looking for shale gas. Production from US wells, where they've been at the frontier of this, is tailing off faster than predicted. The methane leakage from the drilling process means any projected emission savings compared to coal are questionable. There are legitimate public health concerns about drinking water in an industry that's very difficult to regulate. And with the dispersed rural population relying on farming and tourism in Ireland, we don't think fracking is compatible with a sustainable rural economy in Ireland. Likewise, extracting peat on an industrial scale is the most inefficient way to make electricity and the most carbon-intensive way to do so, worse even than coal. And in Ireland, we still subsidise it to the tune of something like €80 million a year in our PSO. And co-firing peat stations with biomass is not a solution either, because it extends the life of the bogs being uncovered for extraction and being extracted. And while they are uncovered, they leak greenhouse gases, as well as the burning of the peat. So we need to end the subsidy, end extraction, and re-wet the bogs to allow them to become carbon sponges and carbon stores again. Ending peat burning by 2020, when the subsidy should have ended anyway, does not necessarily mean closing down the 3 Midland plants that are there now. The Eden Dairy plant has already, I understand, been running at times on 80% biomass. If they can run on 100% biomass from locally grown crops, then we can ensure a just transition for the workers in the industry as well. Moneypoint is due to reach the end of its useful life by 2025, and we cannot continue to burn imported coal for electricity. Apart from peat, it's the worst carbon fuel in terms of its impact on the environment, both local environment in terms of particulate emission and the global atmosphere. And I'm sceptical of the claims that Moneypoint can be converted to biomass. It's hard to see us producing enough biomass in Ireland to fire Moneypoint. And importation of biomass on any sort of large scale brings a host of problems, from security of supply in a competitive market to environmental and social impact where it's being grown. We are already seeing land grabs from poor farmers in places in Africa and elsewhere to grow palm oil for export for both biofuel and biomass use. And indeed, I understand Eden Dairy is burning pine kernels as part of its co-firing experiments. So we need to start that phase out over the next 5 years, over the period of the White Paper. Thirdly, we need to ramp up renewables in general and unleash a solar revolution. I disagree here with Eddie as to when we start this. Ireland was not rich in the natural resources of the fossil fuel age, but we are rich in the resources of the post-fossil age. We are the second windiest country in Europe after Scotland, and just as we have to leave most of our remaining fossil fuels in the ground, we can't afford to leave most of our wind energy in the air. But it must be community-based, we would say, and community-led, or at least there must be a much stronger community involvement than there has been heretofore. And I'll come back to how that's done in a minute. And it's not all about wind. We need to ramp up renewables more generally. There are only 6 anaerobic digestion plants in the Republic compared to 26 in the north. We need to simplify licensing, grid access and price support for this form of renewables because the raw materials for anaerobic digestion are in plentiful supply on Irish farms, and it can provide, again, a useful industry in rural Ireland. But for me, the most exciting area is solar. Thanks to German investment and Chinese manufacturing innovation, the price of solar PV panels, as Eddie has mentioned already, is plummeting, making it a viable technology now in Ireland, certainly into the future. A solar panel in Dublin will yield up to 80% of a solar panel in Madrid because of our longer daylight hours, and certainly as much as a solar panel in Denmark or in Germany, where of a similar latitude. During the recent UK heatwave, solar provided 15% of electricity in the UK. But a word of caution. If we're to avoid the sort of backlash that we saw to the export plans in the Midlands of wind and to the pylons in various parts of the country, we need to lead with a community and household rooftop solar policy first. And locally appropriate industrial solar can follow that. But we need to get people involved first, show the technology works, show that there's something in this for everyone, rather than allowing it to look like a large-scale industrial subsidy farming, as people will say it is, if we don't do that. Overall on renewables, an Irish academic based in Denmark has developed a scenario for 100% renewable energy usage in Ireland. And his paper, David Connolly's paper on a green plan for Ireland, is easy to find online. A word on Germany. Eddie mentioned that they're paying, domestic customers are paying a lot for their electricity. And they are paying more than we are, for sure. But 51% of renewables in Germany are owned by local people and households and communities. So they're paying themselves a higher price for electricity, many of them. And if they want to invest German money in bringing down the price of solar for all of us, well, I'm all for that. In the long term, that is globally economically efficient, even if it may be somehow short-term less efficient for them. But for the rest of us, it makes a huge amount of sense. So finally, my last two things. We need to enable us all to become energy citizens, not just consumers or customers. We have discovered time and again, from Carnsore to Corrib, from frac pads to pylons, that if you don't involve people from the beginning in a meaningful discussion about the energy decisions that will impact on them, they will be alienated, they will feel put upon, they will feel ripped off, and they will resist. And they will derail your best laid plans and pipelines, if that's the case. So we need to actually bring people in early in the decision making as to what kind of choices we make, because it's not pylons or no pylons, wind or no wind. It's wind or fracking or nuclear or coal to be fry our future. They're the real choices, and we have to bring people in, not when they see a project outside their door, but before those projects are decided upon. The white paper has been a beginning of that kind of engagement, small enough with some regional workshops that we really push them to have, not just seminars in Dublin. But we need to see a lot more sustained leadership politically in that space over many years to bring people involved in it in a positive way. And finally, we need to promote household and community ownership of renewables. The best way to achieve societal ownership of this collective project of transformation is to actually allow people to own or part own the local energy projects. The best known community energy project in Ireland is in the Temple Wind Farm in Tipperary, but it took 10 years for that project to come to fruition, for the group to get it to actually be on the grid and making money. If we're to replicate that success across the country, community groups need a support service in the shape of some sort of intermediary agency like the SSIA can do maybe, and was recommended by NESC. They also need streamlined access to the grid, and like in Scotland, we need a target for community energy and some sort of fund to kickstart community projects. We also very much support a Danish model for developer-led projects, and that would mean that all developer-led projects have to make 20% of their equity available for purchase by the local community within a certain radius. And if they don't get that, it can spread out a bit. And if they don't get that, they can't go ahead. So it really makes buy-in a literal thing and means community consent is a real thing as well. And finally, back to solar. Even with falling solar panel prices and long days, there's no sense in me putting a solar panel on my roof in Dublin at the moment, because I'm forced to give away any energy I don't use from the solar panel for free to the grid. There's no payment for the surplus solar energy that I produce. So mandating a payment for electricity from solar generation is key to unlocking a new era of progress on renewables. It can help reset the debate. It's not just about wind, but it also has potential for mass participation, which I think is key, like no other technology, not just on a household level, but more specifically at community level. There are over 1,000 parishes in Ireland, over 2,000 GAA clubs and over 3,000 primary schools, most with south-facing roofs somewhere among their properties. When it makes sense for them to club together to put solar panels on their roofs of their buildings, we can unleash a real community energy revolution. And I look forward to seeing all those green schools becoming solar schools over the next 5 to 10 years. And I hope the first step, though, is the white paper promising to put a payment in place for solar energy. Yesterday, to finish, the McGill Summer School honoured the contribution of T.K. Whitaker to Irish public life. It strikes me that Minister White, the Minister for Energy, and this government have an opportunity to make the white paper on energy as ambitious for the transformation of our energy system as Whitaker's Grey Book was for the transformation of our economy 50, 60 years ago now. If Ireland is to have a sustainable, secure, affordable energy system that is zero carbon by mid-century, it is an opportunity we can't afford to miss. Thank you.